December's last nights don't just feel cold, they feel watched. When the year is almost over and the streets are wrapped in fog, something else moves in the quiet between the distant hum of traffic, the flicker of dying streetlights, and the echo of footsteps that shouldn't be there. Windows glow with warm holiday lights, but just beyond that glow, the dark feels heavier, closer, almost aware. A December month horror story isn't just about ghosts or legends. It's about people who vanished on their way home, houses that changed after one, winter night, and memories no one in the family dares to talk about. Tonight, you're going to hear those stories, the ones December refused to bury. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and subscribe to our channel for more horror stories that'll keep you up at night. Story 1. December had come down hard that year, bitter, early, and merciless. By the second week, the town of Lignoth looked like it had been carved out of ice. The streets were quiet, the street lamps glowing weakly through drifting snow, and the highway beyond the hills hummed with the distant growl of 18-wheelers forcing their way through the winter storm. Evelyn Hart pulled her jacket tighter as she stepped through the automatic doors of Lignoth Memorial Hospital. Night shift again, her 7th winter working ICU. Most nights, nothing surprised her anymore. Cold exposure, frostbite, drunk drivers, the occasional bar fight gone wrong. Trauma had a rhythm, and after enough years you learn to sync with it. But tonight felt off the moment she walked in. The air felt too still, too quiet. Riley Kahn, one of the younger EMTs, approached her with a paper cup of coffee, and a look she had never seen on him before, a tight, unsettled expression. "We've got someone coming up from the ER," he said. "This one's different." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "He was found on Highway 17. A trucker picked him up. Guy was half frozen, stumbling in the snow. No ID, no coat. Hands were messed up." Riley swallowed hard. Before he passed out, he kept saying something about people coming after him, said they'd find him anywhere. Evelyn felt a faint prickling down her spine. "Is he talking now?" "Not really. He drifted in and out in the ambulance, called them they, said they knew his name, his family, where he lived." Riley exhaled. "He said they'd promised they'd kill him if he talked." Evelyn didn't respond. Instead, she took the chart Riley handed her. Male, unidentified, approximately 40 to 50. Severe hypothermia, frostbite both hands and feet, contusions along the ribs, defensive wounds on forearms, a classic assault victim. But the circumstances didn't fit any pattern she knew. When she entered his room, the man lay on the bed like something carved out of winter, pale, motionless, lips cracked. His breathing was shallow, nearly imperceptible. The monitor beeped steadily in the quiet room. The ER had given him a placeholder name, Jonas Mercer, John Doe. Evelyn didn't love placeholder names, but the system required one for tracking. She moved closer, examining his frostbitten fingertips. A few looked necrotic. Deep cuts along his knuckles suggested he'd fought, hard. Then, his eyelids twitched. "Sir," she said gently, "you're in a hospital. You're safe." His eyes opened and locked onto hers. Not confusion, not delirium. Pure, raw terror. His hand shot up weakly and grabbed her wrist. His voice cracked like ice. "They're coming." "Who's coming?" Evelyn asked, keeping her voice steady. "The men, the truck." He coughed, eyes burning with fear. "They took me, took all of us." Evelyn tensed. "All of you." "There were others," he whispered. "They kept us somewhere, cold, underground maybe, I don't know. They said we were being moved, transferred." He shook his head violently. Please, don't let them find me." "They said they always know." Evelyn pressed the room's call button with her free hand. His panic wasn't normal. This wasn't ordinary trauma. This was something else, something learned, something survived. Her supervisor arrived just as Jonas's breathing began to spike. The monitor alarm shrilled. They sedated him before he spiraled into shock. When he finally went quiet, Evelyn stepped out into the hall, her heart hammering faster than she liked to admit. Riley hovered nearby. "What'd he say?" She hesitated. "He said he was held somewhere, with others. Talked about being moved, like cargo." Riley's face blanched. Before Evelyn could say anything more, the hospital phone rang. The front desk transferred the call to ICU. Sheriff Alden Price's gravelly voice came through the receiver. "We got a report about your John Doe," he said, "and we just received 2 separate calls tonight. Two more people found wandering the roadside, confused, half-frozen, no memory of how they got there. Evelyn felt the floor shift under her feet. "Do you think," she asked quietly, "that these incidents are connected?" A long silence. Then, "I don't know," the sheriff admitted. "But I don't like the pattern. And winter storms give the wrong people perfect cover." When Evelyn hung up, she turned to the window. Snow drifted past the glass like tiny ghosts moving across the dark. And far in the distance, on Highway 17, a single pair of truck. Headlights cut through the storm, slow, deliberate, almost prowling. The snow had intensified by midnight, turning Highway 17 into a white, shifting tunnel. Marcus Vale had been driving long-haul trucks for 22 years, and even he felt something was wrong with this storm. It wasn't just the visibility. It was the stillness beneath the wind, as if the storm were hiding something. His CB radio crackled weakly, barely cutting through the static. "Anyone got eyes on that white van? Last seen near mile marker 41, a distant driver asked. Marcus didn't answer. He hadn't seen any van, but he had seen something else, a figure, standing on the side of the road. He hadn't stopped earlier, not with the storm hitting and ice forming under his tires. But the image stayed burned in his mind, a man standing in the snow facing away, motionless, like he was waiting for someone. Now, 10 miles down the road, Marcus saw another one. Same stance, same stillness. This time he hit the brakes. His truck skidded lightly before stabilizing. Marcus slid out of the cab and pulled his coat tight as snow cut across his face like shards. "Hey," he shouted. The figure didn't move. Marcus approached cautiously. The darkness around them felt unnaturally thick. The man's clothes were soaked, ice clinging to the shoulders. "Sir, you okay?" The figure turned. The face was pale, lips blue, eyes wide and unfocused. Frost clung to his eyelashes like white dust. But the most disturbing part wasn't the cold. It was the expression. The man looked terrified of something behind Marcus. "Please," the man croaked. "Don't let them take me back." Marcus felt his pulse spike. Who's after you?" The man didn't answer with words. He raised his trembling hand and pointed. Behind Marcus, down the highway, toward the darkness. Marcus turned. 2 distant headlights glowed through the storm. Slow, unhurried, coming straight toward them. "Is that who you're talking about?" Marcus asked. The man's breath shook out in a broken whisper. "They always follow." Marcus grabbed him under the arm. "Come on, we're leaving." He hauled the man toward the truck, every instinct screaming. The headlights behind them grew brighter, cutting clean lines through the storm. They weren't weaving, they weren't drifting, they were tracking. Marcus and the man climbed into the cab. Snow spattered the windshield as Marcus slammed the door shut and locked it. The cab felt too small, too quiet. "Explain," Marcus said, starting the engine. "Who are they?" The man shook violently. "They take people. They move us. He stopped, because the headlights behind them had stopped too. The vehicle, whatever it was, had halted in the middle of the highway. Its lights were fixed directly on Marcus's truck. Then they flickered once, a signal. Marcus shifted into gear. "We're done here." He floored the accelerator, and the truck lurched forward through the storm. Snow blasted across the hood. The headlights behind them stayed in place for 5 seconds, then began to move, slowly at first, then faster. Marcus clenched the wheel. "Hold on." The man in the passenger seat began shaking uncontrollably, whispering something Marcus couldn't understand. Marcus leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. That was when he noticed something strange. No matter how fast he drove, the headlights behind them didn't grow smaller. They stayed the same distance, perfectly matched to his speed. Like a hunter pacing its prey. Marcus's breath fogged the glass. "What the hell?" The man finally spoke clearly, voice breaking. "They told us they never lose a trail." Marcus drove faster. The headlights behind them followed, not weaving, not sliding, not struggling in the snow, just following, as if they weren't affected by the storm at all. Marcus felt a chill deeper than the cold outside. He pushed the truck harder, but the lights kept coming, and then they vanished, gone, as if swallowed by the snow. Marcus stared through the rearview mirror, heart pounding in his ears, where a tap hit the passenger side window. Marcus jerked around. There was nothing outside. The man beside him curled into the seat, whispering the same phrase over and over. They always find you. They always find you. They always... Marcus didn't hear the rest, because the radio suddenly cut through the silence with a single fractured transmission. Truck 49. Do not stop. Repeat, do not stop. They're tracking movement on 17. Then, static. Marcus tightened his grip on the wheel. Whatever was happening on Highway 17 tonight wasn't natural, and he had just picked up someone they'd been following. Ahead in the darkness, the snow spiraled harder, as if the storm itself was trying to hide something. This night wasn't about weather anymore. It was about survival. Evelyn Hart was halfway through her chart updates when one of the security guards, Tom Lawson, rushed into the ICU wing. His face was pale. "You need to come with me," he said. Now, Evelyn followed him down the hall. The hospital felt colder than usual, like the heating had dropped, even though the thermostat read normal. Tom stopped outside an unused supply room. "Listen," he said quietly. "No one opened this room tonight. It's been locked since last week, but a nurse reported noises inside." Evelyn frowned. "What kind of noises?" "Movement, dragging, someone breathing." Tom unlocked the door. The hinges groaned as it opened. The room was dark, the air stale. Evelyn stepped in and immediately smelled something metallic, old blood. The light flickered on. In the center of the room sat a chair, a single metal chair pulled away from the wall. On the seat was melted snow. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Someone had been sitting there recently. Someone soaked from outside. Tom whispered, "We checked camera footage. No one entered. No one left." Evelyn scanned the room. Cabinet doors were cracked open. A faint trail of wet footprints led toward the back wall, footprints that ended abruptly, as if the person had simply vanished into the floor. Tom stepped closer to the chair. That's not the worst part. He handed Evelyn a small folded paper he'd found under the chair. It was damp and wrinkled. Evelyn unfolded it. One line was written in shaky handwriting. "They're inside already." She felt a cold rush through her body. "We need to check on the John Doe. Now." They hurried back to Jonas Mercer's room. Evelyn pushed the door open and stopped. The bed was empty. The blankets were torn off. The heart monitor cord ripped from the wall. 4-line on the floor, still dripping. No sign of a struggle. No sign he'd walked out. No footprints. No wet trail. Just gone. Tom pulled out his radio, but it only hissed with static. Evelyn checked the corners, the bathroom, the hallway. He didn't leave on his own. He couldn't have. Tom swallowed hard. "We need to lock down the floor." Before Evelyn could respond, the overhead lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. A distorted voice came over the hospital intercom, low, broken, almost whispering. "Transfer complete." Evelyn froze. The voice wasn't anyone from staff, and part of it sounded like Jonas. Tom backed toward the wall. "That intercom isn't connected to any patient rooms." Evelyn didn't answer. She was staring at the window. A handprint had appeared on the glass, a wet handprint, not from inside, from outside, 4 stories above ground. The handprint slowly began to slide downward, as if someone were dragging their palm along the glass, trying to steady themselves while climbing. Evelyn stepped back. "Call the sheriff. Now." Tom reached for his radio, but before he could speak, something else pressed against the window. Another hand. Then another. Then a shadowed face, barely visible through the frost. Not Jonas. Someone else. Someone watching. Someone climbing. Tom whispered, "What the hell is that?" The face on the other side of the glass leaned closer and smiled. The glass cracked. Just once. A thin white line. Evelyn grabbed Tom's arm. "Move. Now." Behind them, the intercom crackled again. "Next transfer in progress." Tom and Evelyn sprinted toward the emergency stairwell, the only place in the hospital not wired through the main security system. The hallway lights dimmed behind them, as if something was moving through the circuits, killing them one by one. Evelyn shoved open the stairwell door. The sound hit her instantly. Footsteps, not above, not below, all around. Heavy boots, slow and deliberate, echoing from every level at once. Tom whispered, "No one else is supposed to be in here." Evelyn found herself gripping the railing without realizing it. "Keep moving. Don't stop." They started down the stairs, each step sending a hollow clank into the cold air. The stairwell smelled different tonight. Wet concrete, old metal, and something faintly chemical. On the landing between floors, Evelyn noticed something on the floor. A small piece of torn fabric, frozen stiff, dark red at the edge. Tom recognized it first. That's from Jonas's patient gown. Before they could move, the lights in the stairwell snapped off. Complete darkness. The footsteps above them stopped, then the ones below. Evelyn's breath tightened. Tom, don't move. A soft tapping sound began. One level above, then below, then right behind the wall beside them. Tap, 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 like someone dragging metal along the rail. Evelyn fumbled for her phone flashlight, but the moment she turned it on, her beam caught something halfway up the stairs. Legs. Just legs, hanging down from the upper landing. Bare feet, gray skin, toes frozen stiff. They weren't moving, but they were there. Tom clapped a hand over his mouth. Is that... Evelyn shook her head slowly. She couldn't tell if it was a body or something placed there. The footsteps started again, but not from the legs. From behind them. Deep, heavy, slow. Tom whispered, "They're in the stairwell with us." Evelyn grabbed his sleeve. "Down, now." They ran blindly down the next flight, the darkness swallowing each step. The footsteps behind them grew faster, matching their movement. Something metallic scraped along the rail. The stairwell door on the floor below burst open from the inside. A blinding white flash of hallway light cut into the dark. Sheriff Alden Price stepped through, gun drawn. "Move! Move now!" Evelyn and Tom stumbled into the hall. The sheriff slammed the door shut and locked it. Something hit the door from the other side, hard enough to dent the metal. Evelyn gasped. "How did you—" "Got a call from your security office," Price said. Said multiple cameras went offline. Then we picked up a silent alert from this wing. Tom pointed at the dented stairwell door. Whatever is in there, a deep dragging noise interrupted him. Something was scraping up the door from the bottom to the top. Metal under metal. Evelyn felt her skin crawl. "We need to get to Jonas's chart. If someone took him, we need to know how." Price nodded. "Follow me and stay close." They moved through the silent hallway. Every patient room door was closed, every curtain still. The hospital felt emptied out, like time had paused and left only the lights trembling. They reached the ICU station. Jonas's chart was gone. Evelyn's heart dropped. No, he didn't walk out on his own. Someone took this. A small slip of paper lay where the chart had been. Same wet handwriting as the first note. Transfer window 12 minutes. Tom backed away. What does that mean? Price holstered his weapon slowly. It means someone planned this, and they want us to know the schedule. The overhead lights flickered once, then again. Then the intercom whispered, "Transfer window starts now." At the end of the hallway, a patient room door creaked open on its own. Cold air spilled out. Evelyn stared. Someone was standing inside the room. Not Jonas, not a patient. A tall figure, coat dripping, head tilted slightly like it was listening for something. Then it stepped forward. Its boots left no footprints on the floor. Price lifted his gun. "Stay behind me." The figure didn't rush. It simply walked toward them. Steady, silent, unstoppable. And behind it, from the dark room, another figure stepped out. Then another, all walking in perfect sync. Evelyn whispered, Those aren't patients." Price pulled them back. Stairwells blocked, elevators dead. "We head for the south wing. Move!" Evelyn ran, but she looked back just once, enough to see one of the figures tilt its head toward her, as if memorizing her face. Then it spoke, voice calm and cold. "Next transfer, 3 targets." Sheriff Price pulled Evelyn and Tom around the corner into the south wing, the oldest part of the hospital. The lights buzzed weakly overhead, flickering like a dying pulse. The hallway was colder here, colder than it should be indoors. Tom whispered, "They're following us." Footsteps echoed behind them, slow, precise, multiple sets, but none of them sounded like they belonged to living people. Price motioned them into an empty trauma room. "Stay low, don't speak." He killed the light. The room fell into darkness except for the faint glow of snow through the window. Evelyn crouched behind a rolling tray, heart pounding. The hallway outside went silent. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. Then, a single soft exhale. Right outside the door, the handle turned once, stopped. Price aimed his gun, finger trembling, not from fear but from something deeper. Something primal. A shadow passed under the door, not boots, not shoes, bare feet, skin pale, silent. Evelyn clamped a hand over her mouth. The figure outside paused, listening. The quiet stretched into something unbearable. Then another set of pale feet appeared beside the first. Then a third. Tom mouthed, 3 targets. Evelyn's stomach dropped. The intercom voice wasn't taunting them. It was counting them. The door handle turned again. Slowly this time. Testing. Feeling. Price whispered, "If they come in, run. Don't look back." The handle stopped turning. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. Then a slam. Not on their door. On the room across the hall. Something heavy crashed inside it, shaking the walls. Metal scraped. A low, animal-like groan echoed, too deep to be human. The shadows under the door shifted as the figures moved toward the disturbance. 3 sets of bare feet drifted away. Not walking, sliding, as if gravity didn't matter. Price peeked through the blinds. His breath hitched. Jesus. Evelyn risked a glance. The 3 figures were in the other room, hunched over something on the floor, something thrashing weakly. The shadows twisted across the walls like broken limbs. Tom squeezed his own wrist to keep from crying out. Price whispered, "We're leaving, now." They slipped out, moving silently down the hall. Evelyn kept looking back, praying the figures didn't turn, but they didn't have to turn, because they weren't alone. Halfway to the exit, Evelyn froze. Another figure stood at the far end of the hallway. Tall, still, waiting. It stepped forward into the dim light. It was Jonas Mercer, or what was left of him. His eyes were wide open, but empty, utterly empty. His skin was pale, pulled too tight over his jaw. Frost clung to his hair like ash. His hospital gown was torn, the fabric stiff with ice. But the worst part was his posture. He stood perfectly straight, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something that only he could hear. Evelyn whispered, "Jonas?" His lips moved. A faint whisper escaped, like frost breaking. "Transfer complete." Price raised the gun. "Don't come any closer." Jonas didn't obey. He didn't walk. He glided, feet dragging without friction. Evelyn grabbed Tom. "Move!" They ran through the side corridor, Price firing a warning shot. The bullet tore through Jonas's shoulder, but Jonas didn't react, not even a flinch. He kept coming at the same pace, same glide, expression unchanged. They burst into the ambulance bay. Snow blasted inside, wind howling across the empty lot. Price yelled, "Head for the maintenance tunnel!" Tom slipped on the ice, but Evelyn dragged him up. Behind them, Jonas stepped into the snow and left no footprints, none. Evelyn felt her chest tighten with a fear that didn't feel human. They reached the metal hatch leading to the tunnels beneath the hospital. Price threw it open and pushed them down. As Evelyn climbed, she heard it. 3 soft thuds. Above them, the other figures had arrived. Price shouted, "Go!" Evelyn and Tom dropped into the tunnel. Price followed and slammed the hatch shut. Something hit the metal from above, bending it slightly inward. Evelyn stumbled back. "What are they?" Price looked at the buckling hatch. "They're not here to kill us," the metal groaned. "They're here to take us." The hatch bent again. Tom whispered, "Are they still above us?" Evelyn shook her head. "No." She pointed down the dark tunnel where ice was forming on the floor, because at the far end, 3 shapes were already standing. Silent, waiting, blocking the only exit. Between them stood Jonas, head tilted, whispering something into the dark. As they stepped closer, the air grew colder. Colder, almost freezing. Tom grabbed Evelyn's arm. "What do we do?" Evelyn stared at the pale shapes closing in, their bodies leaving no footprints, their shadows bending the wrong direction. Her voice shook. "We run," but there was nowhere left to run. And behind Jonas, deep in the tunnel's darkness, dozens of faint pale figures began to emerge, one by one, like survivors pulled from snowdrifts. Except none of them were alive, and all of them were coming for the next transfer. Story 2. My name is Gregory Foster, and I'm a security consultant for retail businesses across the Midwest. For 16 years, I've installed cameras, designed floor plans to minimize blind spots, trained staff on how to recognize theft and suspicious behavior. I understand security the way most people understand breathing. It's automatic, reflexive, built into how I see the world. Last December, I learned that sometimes the biggest security threat isn't what you're watching for. It's what's hiding in plain sight. I was hired by a shopping mall in Kansas City to do a comprehensive security audit before the holiday season. This was a mid-sized mall, maybe 80 stores, 2 anchor department stores, standard layout. The management was concerned about increased theft during the busy shopping months and wanted everything reviewed and tightened. I spent the first 3 days walking every inch of the property, making notes, photographing problem areas, reviewing existing camera footage. The security team was small, 5 people for a property that size, which meant there were definitely coverage gaps. I documented them all. On the 4th day, I was in the security office reviewing footage when I noticed something unusual. There was a man who appeared in multiple camera feeds over a 2-week period. Not doing anything illegal, just walking, but his pattern was methodical. He'd enter through the south entrance, walk a specific route through the mall, spend time in certain stores, exit through the north entrance. Then he'd leave. The next day, he'd do it again. "Who's this?" I asked the head of security, pointing to the screen. His name was Dennis, a former cop, professional but tired-looking. He studied the footage. "I don't recognize him," he said. "But that's not unusual. We get thousands of people through here. Why?" "Because of the pattern," I said. "Look at the dates. He's been here every single day for 2 weeks. Same time window, same route, same stops. That's not normal shopping behavior." Dennis leaned back in his chair. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking he's either casing for theft, or he's doing surveillance on someone or something in this mall." We pulled footage from multiple angles and watched the man's progression. He moved deliberately but not obviously. He studied store layouts. He paid particular attention to the jewelry store, the electronics store, and, interestingly, the bank branch inside the mall. But he never went inside any of those stores. He just looked. "Could be planning a heist," Dennis said, "or could be a private investigator doing surveillance for someone else." I made a note to increase camera coverage in those specific areas and moved on with my audit. But the pattern bothered me enough that I asked Dennis to flag me if the man came back. He came back 2 days later. This time, he wasn't alone. He had 3 other men with him, younger, all wearing similar outfits, all moving with the same deliberate pace. They repeated the surveillance walk, paying attention to the same stores, the same routes, the same security features. Dennis called me immediately. "They're back," he said. "This time with a crew." I got to the mall within 30 minutes and we watched the footage together. The new men weren't trying to hide anything egregious, but their interest was clearly focused. They timed the security guards' rotations, they clocked the camera positions, they tested door locks. One of them even tried to access the service corridor behind the jewelry store. It was locked, so he moved on, but he'd clearly been testing. "Call the police," I told Dennis. "Tell them you have surveillance footage of potential robbery planning." He did. 2 officers arrived and reviewed the footage. They seemed mildly concerned, but not alarmed. "Could be anything," one officer said. "Theft rings do scout locations, but most of this is just normal mall behavior. We'd need to catch them in the act of actually stealing or breaking in to make an arrest." "They're coming back," I said. "They're going to hit one of those stores, probably after hours or during low traffic times. You could set up surveillance, catch them when they make their move." The officer nodded, but didn't seem particularly motivated. "We'll keep an eye out," he said, and they left. I finished my security audit and submitted my recommendations. Upgraded cameras in the blind spots, better positioning of security personnel, improved after-hours protocols. The mall management approved most of them and scheduled the upgrades to begin in January. I left town on December 18th. 3 days later, on December 21st, the jewelry store was robbed. It happened at 11:47 p.m. during the overnight hours. The security guard on duty was found tied up in the back room. The thieves had come in through the service corridor, disabled one camera. They knew exactly which one, and had roughly 8 minutes inside before the alarm system finally triggered. They got away with approximately $300,000 in merchandise. The police report showed that 4 men had been involved. Video surveillance identified them as the same group that had been casing the mall weeks earlier. Dennis called me, voice tight. "They hit us," he said, 3 days after you left. They knew exactly what they were doing. Did the police catch them?" I asked. "No," he said. "They're gone. The FBI's involved now because of the amount stolen, but the men are in the wind." I drove back to Kansas City the next day to help with the investigation. Working with the FBI, we pulled every scrap of footage from the past month. What emerged was a terrifyingly clear picture of professional planning. The men hadn't just been surveying for 2 weeks, they'd been testing security responses. On several occasions, they deliberately tripped minor alarms, testing how long it took for security to respond, which doors they'd check, how they'd coordinate. They'd learned the schedule of every security guard. They'd identified exactly which camera they could disable without triggering redundancies. They'd timed the police response, discovering that officers took an average of 14 minutes to arrive at the mall from the nearest station. The service corridor they'd used wasn't part of the official building plans. It was an older, sealed-off passageway from when the mall had undergone renovations. They'd somehow known about it and had figured out how to access it. This wasn't random crime, the FBI agent explained to me and Dennis. This was planned by someone who understands mall security intimately. Someone who either works in the industry or has worked with someone who does. How do you plan something like this without being inside the mall? I asked. You don't, the agent said. Not this, precisely. Either one of these men works in security, or they consulted with someone who does. He showed me photographs of the men from the surveillance footage. I studied each face carefully, trying to place them. Then, I saw something. One of the men, not the older one who'd been doing the initial surveillance, but one of the 3 younger ones, looked familiar. Not from the mall, from somewhere else, somewhere professional. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts and old emails, and I found it. 3 years ago, I'd been hired to audit security at a casino in Omaha, Nebraska. Part of that process involved interviewing staff about security protocols. One of the people I'd interviewed was a younger security guard named Tyler, maybe 28 at the time, smart, detail-oriented, asked good questions about why certain systems were redundant and how they could be bypassed. I showed the photograph to the FBI agent. I think one of these men might be someone I worked with, I said, and explained the connection. The FBI followed up. Tyler had been fired from the casino 3 years earlier for attendance issues, but there had never been any formal allegations against him. His employment history after that was spotty, security jobs that lasted a few months before he'd quit or been fired again. But he'd been in contact with the older man, the one doing the surveillance. Their connection was traced through phone records. The older man was named Richard Patrone, age 52, with an extensive history in organized crime. He'd spent time in prison for racketeering and had connections to a larger crime network that specialized in high-value thefts. The theory was that Patrone had identified Tyler as someone with inside knowledge of security systems, recruited him, and trained him as part of a theft crew. The question is, the agent told me, how many other security professionals has this network identified and recruited? The FBI expanded their investigation. They found another security guard, not from my contacts but from a casino in Las Vegas, who'd been recruited 2 years earlier. They're still investigating how many more there might be. The jewelry store robbery was never solved. The merchandise was never recovered. Richard Patrone and his crew vanished. There's an open FBI file and periodic updates, but years have passed and no arrests have been made. What haunts me isn't the robbery itself. It's the realization that came with it. Security is built on the assumption that the people designing and implementing it are trustworthy. But what happens when that assumption breaks? What happens when someone on the inside, someone who understands the systems intimately, decides to use that knowledge for theft? After the incident, I started reviewing my entire career. How many people had I interviewed about security procedures? How many people had I trained? How many people had I shown vulnerabilities to, expecting they'd help me fix them? I realized that I, and every security professional, am essentially creating a roadmap for anyone with criminal intent who manages to get close to us professionally. I changed how I work after that. I no longer discuss specific vulnerabilities or bypass methods with staff during the audit process. I keep those observations separate, shared only with management in confidential reports. I've become more guarded about discussing my methods, and I check the backgrounds of security personnel more thoroughly now, looking for patterns. That might indicate someone is testing the systems rather than protecting them. This December, exactly 3 years after the Kansas City robbery, I did another audit at a different mall. During the process, I noticed a man in a suit watching me work. He was trying to be subtle, but he kept positioning himself where he could see my notes, my camera angles, my recommendations. I reported it to the mall manager immediately. When they reviewed footage, The man was identified as someone with a prior theft conviction who had been working at the mall for 3 weeks under a fake name, ostensibly as a maintenance worker. He disappeared before police arrived to question him. I have no proof he was part of the Petron network or any larger criminal organization, but the pattern was there. Someone trying to learn security vulnerabilities by getting close to someone who understands them. If you work in security, be aware that criminals are studying you as much as you're studying them. If you manage security, be careful about who you hire and what information you give them. And if you're a business owner, understand that sometimes the biggest threat to your security isn't from outside the building. It's from someone on your staff who's been trained to recognize vulnerabilities and has decided to exploit them instead of fix them. The men who robbed that jewelry store are still out there. They're likely planning other thefts, studying other malls, recruiting other security professionals who feel underappreciated or underpaid or simply ambitious enough to see an opportunity. And unless something changes, unless law enforcement gets better at tracking organized theft networks or security professionals, become more cautious about who they train, they'll keep operating, keep stealing, keep disappearing into the margins. All because someone like me taught them how. Story 3. My name is Rachel Hartman, and I manage the community center in Bismarck, North Dakota. For 9 years I've run programming, youth sports, senior activities, holiday events, the kinds of things that keep a community connected during the brutal winters. It's not glamorous work, but it's important. People need places to go when the temperature drops to 20 below and the wind makes being outside life-threatening. Last December, I learned that sometimes the places we think are safest can harbor the darkest intentions. The community center is a sprawling building. Gymnasium, pool, activity rooms, a small theater, offices. During winter, it becomes the social hub of Bismarck. Families with cabin fever bring their kids. Seniors come for water aerobics and card games. Youth groups use the gymnasium. It's warm, it's welcoming, it's a sanctuary from the cold. In November, I hired a new employee, a man named David Chen, age 34. He came with decent references, a background check that came back clean, and he seemed personable and responsible. He was hired as a maintenance supervisor, responsible for keeping the building clean and managing the maintenance staff. David was efficient, almost too efficient. He'd reorganize entire sections of the building without being asked. He'd offer to work extra shifts. He seemed genuinely interested in the community center's operations, asking detailed questions about security, about scheduling, about which areas had cameras and which didn't. I thought it was refreshing. Most employees do the minimum. David seemed genuinely invested. By mid-December, he'd become friendly with several regular visitors, staff members, program directors, even some of the kids who came for after-school activities. He'd bring coffee for the office staff. He'd help carry equipment for youth sports. He remembered people's names and asked about their families. Then, on December 18th, I got a call from the mother of one of the kids in our youth swimming program. "I need to report something," she said, her voice shaking. "My daughter came home today and mentioned that one of your maintenance staff had asked her to help him in the back storage area. He said he needed someone small to reach something on a high shelf. When she got back there, he locked the door and touched her inappropriately." My entire body went cold. "Is your daughter okay?" I asked. "She screamed and ran," the mother said. "He let her go, but she's traumatized. And I want to know how this person got hired." I contacted the police immediately and called an emergency staff meeting. When I described David and asked if anyone had seen anything unusual, 3 people spoke up. One of our lifeguards said David had asked her repeatedly about the pool area's security, specifically which times had the fewest people and whether there were cameras in the changing rooms. She'd been uncomfortable but hadn't wanted to report it. One of the youth basketball coaches mentioned that David had made comments about which kids were pretty and had volunteered multiple times to supervise youth activities, despite having no programming experience. The front desk staff member said David had asked for access to personnel files to update cleaning schedules and had spent time in the office alone, going through drawers and filing cabinets. My hands were shaking as I realized what I was looking at. David wasn't a maintenance supervisor who'd become invested in the community. He was a predator who'd carefully positioned himself to gain access to children. The police arrived within 40 minutes. They found David in the maintenance area, trying to delete files from the computer. They arrested him on the spot. A search of his locker revealed a camera, several USB drives, and a notebook filled with observations about the building. his layout, security vulnerabilities, and notes about specific children, their names, their schedules, their home addresses. In his vehicle, they found hundreds of photographs, many of them taken inside the community center, showing children in various states of undress, in changing areas and bathrooms. The investigation that followed was devastating. David hadn't been working at the community center for 2 months, but in that time, he'd systematically documented security vulnerabilities, identified blind spots in camera coverage, and photographed children without their knowledge or consent. Police discovered that he'd been renting a storage unit where he'd organized photographs and videos he'd taken from multiple community centers and public pools across the region. The background check that had come back clean. It turned out David had been using a false name. His real name was Daniel Rothstein, and he had a prior conviction for child sexual abuse material distribution. He'd served 6 years, been released 5 years ago, and had since been living under an alias, moving between states, targeting community centers and pools. He was methodical, the detective explained to me. He didn't start by abusing children. He started by positioning himself to gain access, by learning the security systems, by identifying vulnerabilities. He was planning a larger operation. What does that mean? I asked, my voice hollow. It means he was probably going to use the information he gathered to either facilitate trafficking or to commit more serious crimes, the detective said. But he was arrested before he could escalate. The investigation expanded rapidly. Police contacted other community centers and public pools in the region. 7 other facilities confirmed that David had worked at their locations within the past 5 years, always using different names, always in maintenance or custodial roles. At each location, he'd left behind documentation of security vulnerabilities. At one community pool in Montana, investigators found evidence that he'd bypassed security cameras and had assaulted a child in a bathroom. The child's family hadn't reported it. They'd been afraid and ashamed and didn't know what to do. Only after police contacted them directly did they disclose what had happened. David had created a pattern of predation that spanned multiple states and multiple years, and he'd done it by exploiting the trust we place in people we hire to work in our facilities. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Families pulled their kids from programs, staff members called in sick, parents called demanding to know how someone with a criminal background had been hired. There were town meetings, there were lawsuits, insurance companies got involved. I spent weeks in meetings with lawyers, police, community leaders, all of them trying to figure out what had gone wrong. What had gone wrong was systemic. The background check company David had used to create his false identity was sophisticated. They'd provided documents that looked legitimate. The references he'd provided were phone numbers that connected to voicemail services he'd set up. The previous employers he'd listed were fake. But the real problem wasn't David's deception. It was how easy it had been for him to find work in community spaces. Maintenance positions don't require the same level of scrutiny as positions that directly supervise children. So David had hired on as maintenance, and then through that position had gained access to areas where children changed clothes, showered, and used bathrooms. He'd exploited the structural vulnerabilities of our systems, not just the physical security cameras, but the employment security systems that assume someone in a maintenance role isn't a threat. The Bismarck Community Center implemented sweeping changes after David's arrest. We hired a security consultant to review all access protocols. We installed additional cameras in sensitive areas, changing rooms, bathrooms, etc. We implemented 2-person rules for maintenance staff in certain areas. We created a database of known offenders and cross-referenced every hire. We also implemented something I wish had been done from the beginning: regular, thorough background checks that went beyond the standard criminal history. We hired investigators to verify employment history and personal references. We created a reporting system for staff members to flag suspicious behavior. But here's what I've learned. These measures are only as good as the people implementing them, and criminals are always thinking 5 steps ahead. David Chen, or Daniel Rothstein, is currently serving 22 years in federal prison. But during his trial, something came out that terrified me even more than his crimes. He testified that there were at least 3 other men operating similar schemes in different regions. He described a network of predators who shared information about vulnerabilities in community facilities, who coached each other on how to get hired without triggering red flags, who moved between states specifically to exploit the gaps in our systems. It's not one person, the prosecutor explained to me after the trial. It's an organized network, and David was just one cell of it. The FBI opened an investigation into what they're calling facility targeting, predators who deliberately seek employment or volunteer positions in community spaces specifically to gain access to children and to photograph or assault them. As far as I know, that investigation is ongoing, but I doubt it's made much progress because the network is deliberately decentralized. Each person operates independently in different regions, using different names, but sharing information about which facilities have the weakest security. Every time winter comes now and families start coming to the community center seeking warmth and connection, I think about David. I think about how he exploited that exact need, the need for community, for safety, for a place to escape the cold. I think about the children whose images he photographed without consent. I think about the child in Montana who was assaulted and didn't report it because she was afraid. I think about all the places he worked before Bismarck and how many other children might have been affected. And I think about how the only reason he was caught was because one little girl screamed and ran. If she'd been too terrified to respond, if she'd been frozen by shock, if she'd run but hadn't told her mother, he might still be working somewhere, photographing children, documenting vulnerabilities, preparing for whatever comes next. If you have children, talk to them about the adults in positions of authority in their lives. Teach them that no legitimate activity should require them to be alone with an adult behind a locked door. Teach them that trusted adults don't ask them to keep secrets from their parents. And if you manage a facility that serves children, take the hiring and vetting process seriously. Assume that predators will try to get hired. Assume they'll have fake references and false documentation. Assume they're planning several steps ahead. Because they are. And the only thing standing between them and the children in your facility is the systems you put in place and the people you hire to maintain those systems. Don't assume anyone is trustworthy just because they seem personable or efficient or invested, because the best predators are the ones who understand that safety is built on trust, and they're very, very good at manufacturing it. Story 4. My name is Nathan Cross, and I work as an emergency room physician at a level 1 trauma center in Minneapolis. For 13 years, I've treated patients at their worst accidents, overdoses, violence, sudden illness. I've learned to compartmentalize trauma the way only medical professionals can. A patient is a puzzle. An injury is a problem to solve. Emotions cloud judgment, so I've trained myself not to feel them while I work. Last December, a case came through the ER that made me understand how dangerous that compartmentalization can become. The patient arrived by ambulance around 10 p.m. on December 17th. A man, approximately 60 years old, found unresponsive in his home by a neighbor. The initial assessment showed signs of blunt force trauma to the head, facial injuries and bruising consistent with being beaten. He was unconscious, vital signs unstable, breathing shallow. We got him stabilized, got imaging, prepared for surgery. The neurosurgeon found a subdural hematoma and went in immediately. The patient survived the surgery, but his prognosis was guarded. He'd been in a coma for 17 hours. His name was listed as Robert Manning. No emergency contacts in the system. No identification on his person. The police had responded to the scene but found no indication of forced entry, no signs of robbery, nothing that clearly indicated how he'd come to be beaten in his own home. 2 days later he woke up. He was confused, disoriented, in pain, but he was conscious. He could communicate. The first thing he asked was, "Is she safe?" "Is who safe?" I asked. "My granddaughter," he said. "Sarah, is she okay?" I had no information about a granddaughter. I called the social worker to help figure out his family situation. It took several hours of careful questioning to piece together what had happened. Robert Manning had been a widower living alone. His son, Michael, lived about 40 minutes away with his wife and 2 children, a daughter Sarah, age 11, and a son James, age 8. On the night of the attack, Michael and his wife had left the children with Robert for the evening while they went to a company holiday party. They'd expected to be back around midnight. Robert had given the kids dinner, put them in the guest room to watch a movie, and gone to bed around 10 p.m. Sometime after that, someone had broken into the house. Robert had woken to the sound of voices in the hallway. He'd gotten out of bed to investigate and had been attacked, struck repeatedly with what turned out to be a baseball bat. He tried to fight back, tried to reach the children's room, but he'd been beaten unconscious. The next thing he remembered was waking up in the hospital. "What about the kids?" he asked urgently. "What happened to Sarah and James?" The social worker checked the police report. According to the officers who'd responded, the children hadn't been found in the house. When Michael and his wife came home around 12:30 a.m. and found Robert bleeding in the hallway, they'd searched the house and discovered the children were gone. Robert's face went completely white. "They took them," he whispered. "When I was trying to get to them, whoever did this took them." The case exploded. An Amber Alert was issued immediately for the two children. Police descended on Robert's house and the surrounding neighborhood. The FBI got involved. Missing children cases always do. What investigators found was carefully planned. The lock on Robert's back door had been professionally manipulated, not forced, but carefully picked or bypassed. There was no sign of forced entry, which suggested either expertise or familiarity with the house. The attack on Robert had been vicious enough to neutralize him quickly, but not so extreme as to kill him, suggesting the attackers knew exactly what level of force to use. And most tellingly, when police reviewed Robert's home security system, they found it had been disabled, not by cutting wires or smashing equipment, but by someone who'd known the password and had shut it down from inside the system. This was someone who knew the house, the lead detective told me when she came to interview Robert at the hospital. Someone who had access or had been inside before. Robert could only think of one person, his son Michael's former business partner, a man named Derek Paulson. Derek had worked with Michael in a commercial real estate venture about 2 years earlier. The partnership had ended badly. Financial disputes, disagreements about project management. Michael had pushed Derek out of the business, and Derek had been bitter about it. Derek had visited Robert's house occasionally when the business partnership was active, but that was 2 years ago. Could he have remembered the house layout that well? The detective asked. "I don't know," Robert said weakly, but he was angry at Michael. Angry enough that I remember Michael being worried about retaliation. The police brought Derek Paulson in for questioning. He had an alibi. He'd been at a holiday party with co-workers. But when they checked the guest list, his name was there, but multiple people said they hadn't actually seen him. He could have left and come back. More importantly, when police searched his apartment, they found photographs. Dozens of photographs of Robert's house, taken from various angles, showing the layout, the security system, the back door. There were also photographs of Michael's family, his wife, and most troublingly, photographs of the two children, Sarah and James, taken at their school, at parks, at their home. Derek had been systematically documenting Michael's family for months, but there was more. In a storage unit Derek had rented, investigators found preparations for kidnapping. Restraints, tranquilizers, supplies for keeping people in a confined space, and documents, detailed plans for holding the children, demanding ransom, potential escape routes. Derek was arrested immediately, but the children were still missing. During interrogation, Derek confessed to the attack on Robert, but he denied kidnapping the children. "I went to the house," he said. "I wanted to confront Robert, to scare him, to show Michael that I could get to his family whenever I wanted. But when I was there, when Robert was down on the floor, someone else came through the back door." "Someone else?" the detective asked. "Yeah," Derek said. "Another man. He had the kids already. He had them in bags like he was prepared. He said something like, 'You're too loud. Go home. Forget this happened.' And then he left with the kids." The detective thought Derek was lying, using the story of a second perpetrator to avoid full responsibility. But then they checked the security system footage more carefully. Derek's access had been recorded, entering at 10:47 p.m. The attack on Robert, his departure at 11:23 p.m. But there was another entry. Someone else had bypassed the security system at 11:01 p.m. while Derek was still in the house attacking Robert. That person had accessed the guest room, then exited at 11:25 p.m. with what appeared to be two smaller figures. There was a second perpetrator. The investigation expanded drastically. The second person hadn't disabled the security system. They'd used Derek's access somehow, or had accessed it independently. The question was, did they know Derek was going to be there, or was Derek just convenient cover? Forensic analysis of Derek's apartment and storage unit revealed something startling. Derek had been planning the kidnapping for months. He'd documented the children's schedules, their routines, their vulnerabilities. But the planning was disorganized, fantasistic, the kind of obsessive planning. Someone does when they're not actually going to go through with it, but someone else had gone through with it. Someone else had coordinated the timing, had taken advantage of Derek's presence. To create confusion had been far more professional and efficient. This is organized crime, the FBI agent told us. This isn't a personal vendetta. This is someone who targets children, who takes them for exploitation, and who used the chaos of Derek's attack to cover their own operation. The search for Sarah and James went on for 6 days. During that time, Robert was discharged from the hospital, still in pain, still traumatized. His son Michael was barely holding together. The whole community was mobilized, search parties, tips called in, media coverage relentless. Then, on December 23rd, a semi-truck broke down on Interstate 90, about 200 miles north of Minneapolis. The driver called for roadside assistance. While waiting for a tow truck, he noticed something odd about the trailer. Sounds coming from inside, movement. He looked through a gap in the trailer door and saw 2 children, bound and gagged, lying on the floor. He called 911 immediately. The children were found alive. The man driving the truck was named Walter Krebs, age 51. He had an extensive history in organized human trafficking. He operated across multiple states, had connections to a larger network that specialized in child exploitation. The theory developed quickly. Krebs had been scouting Robert's neighborhood, looking for vulnerable targets. Derek's planned attack on Robert had been pure coincidence, something that happened at the exact moment Krebs was executing his own kidnapping plan. Krebs had used Derek's presence as a distraction, taken the children while Derek was beating Robert. Derek's attack had inadvertently enabled Krebs's kidnapping. Whether Derek and Krebs were connected, whether Derek's information about the house had been passed along somehow, remained unclear, but the result was devastating. 2 children had been taken by a predator with a criminal organization behind him. Sarah and James survived physically, but psychologically, they were destroyed. Both men were convicted. Derek received 25 years for the assault on Robert and conspiracy charges. Krebs received 40 years for kidnapping, human trafficking, and child exploitation charges. The FBI continued investigating Krebs's network, but as far as I know, the larger organization remained largely intact, just operating with Krebs out of commission. What struck me about this case, what made me reconsider my entire approach to medicine, was what happened after the children were found. Sarah and James came through the ER for examination and treatment. I was the attending physician. My job was to assess for injuries, to collect evidence, to prepare them for the subsequent interviews with social workers and investigators. I did my job. I was professional, clinical, appropriately gentle with the children, but emotionally neutral. I treated them like patients, which is what I'd been trained to do. But as I was examining Sarah, this 11-year-old girl who'd been abducted and held by a child trafficking ring, she looked at me and started crying. Not from pain, but from the weight of what had happened to her. "Will he come back?" she asked. "Will he find me?" And I realized in that moment that my compartmentalization wasn't protection, it was failure. Because what that child needed wasn't a clinical professional maintaining emotional distance. She needed someone to acknowledge that what had happened to her was absolutely terrifying, that her fear was justified, that she wasn't being irrational or dramatic. She needed someone to feel something. I sat down with her and I let myself feel it. I let myself experience the horror of what she'd survived, the vulnerability of childhood, the systematic evil that targets children because they're defenseless. And I cried with her. I still work in the ER. I still compartmentalize when I need to. Medical emergencies require clear thinking, but I've learned to turn that compartmentalization off when it matters. When a patient needs to know that what they've experienced is real, is serious, is worth feeling something about. Last December, 2 children were saved from a human trafficking network because a truck driver paid attention to strange sounds. They survived because the police were thorough, because the FBI investigated, because multiple systems aligned correctly. But they also survived because they were found quickly. Not every child is. Not every parent gets to see their missing children again. Not every trafficking victim escapes before permanent damage is done. If you see something that suggests a child is being exploited, unusual behavior from an adult, toward a child, children appearing malnourished or controlled, signs of trafficking, report it. Don't wait. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Because the difference between a child being saved and a child disappearing forever can come down to one person paying attention. And if you work in a field that requires compartmentalization, medicine, law enforcement, social work, remember that the compartmentalization is a tool, not a permanent state. There will be cases that break through. There will be moments when you need to let yourself feel the full weight of what you're witnessing, because that's what allows you to stay human while doing work that requires you to see inhumanity. Sarah and James are in therapy now. They're healing, slowly. They'll carry this trauma forever, but they're alive, they're safe, and they have a future. That future exists because systems worked, because people paid attention, and because sometimes, even in the darkest situations, people choose to see and act on what they see. Not everyone gets that outcome. This December, somewhere, someone is planning to take a child. Somewhere, a child is being held. Somewhere, a predator is being patient, systematic, careful. The only thing that stops them is people who refuse to look away. My name is Thomas Archer, and I'm a detective with the Denver Police Department. I've worked homicide and violent crimes for 18 years. I've seen the worst of what people do to each other. I've learned to compartmentalize, to keep the job separate from my personal life, to see dead bodies as puzzles to be solved rather than as human tragedies. But last December, I worked a case that broke through every barrier I'd built, and it made me understand that some horrors don't announce themselves. They hide in the gaps between what we see and what we choose not to see. The call came in on December 19th at 2:47 a.m. A body had been found in a parking garage downtown. A woman, approximately 30 years old. Severe blunt force trauma, likely deceased for somewhere between 12 and 18 hours. The location was the Heritage parking garage on 16th Street, relatively public, but with enough darkness and concrete to hide violence. My partner, Detective Sarah Reeves, and I arrived within 30 minutes. The body was positioned in a back corner of level 3, partially hidden behind a support column. She was wearing business casual clothing, slacks, a blouse, a blazer. Her purse was still with her, wallet intact, credit cards untouched. This wasn't a robbery. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment suggested the trauma was inconsistent with a fall or accidental injury. Someone had beaten her, methodically and severely. "Do we have an ID?" I asked the officer securing the scene. "Her driver's license says Rebecca Walsh," he said. "Address is an apartment building about 2 miles from here. No emergency contacts listed yet, but we're working on it." We spent the next 6 hours processing the scene, photographing evidence, interviewing the few people in the garage. At the time, security guard, couple of late-night workers, a man whose shift at a nearby hospital had just ended. None of them had seen anything. The parking garage's security cameras covered the main areas but had blind spots in the back sections, a common problem with older facilities. By mid-morning, we'd identified Rebecca Walsh's emergency contact, her mother, Linda, living in a suburb outside Denver. We made the notification call. Her mother's response was immediate shock and grief, but also confusion. "Rebecca's so careful," her mother said. "She doesn't go out late. She doesn't party. She works at an accounting firm downtown and mostly keeps to herself. I can't imagine how this happened." "Had she mentioned any conflicts recently?" I asked. "Any relationships that were troubled? Any threats?" "No, nothing like that," her mother said. "Rebecca was quiet. She had a few friends from work, but mostly she just went to work and came home." That pattern, quiet, routine, careful, made the violence of her death feel more random and more terrifying. The investigation began with her workplace. Rebecca worked at a mid-sized accounting firm called Morrison & Associates. She'd been there for 4 years, apparently well-liked, reliable, competent. Her supervisor described her as professional but private. She had lunch occasionally with colleagues, but didn't socialize much outside of work. Then we got a break. One of Rebecca's co-workers, a woman named Jennifer, mentioned that Rebecca had mentioned being uncomfortable around one of the firm's clients. The client was a real estate developer named Marcus Webb, age 47. He'd hired the firm to manage his accounting for several commercial properties. Rebecca said he made comments, Jennifer explained. Not overtly sexual, but inappropriate. She felt like he was paying attention to her specifically, but when she mentioned it to management, they basically said he was an important client and to not make a big deal out of it. That changed things. We brought Marcus Webb in for questioning. He was composed, cooperative, well-dressed. He denied any inappropriate behavior toward Rebecca. "I have no idea what she's talking about," he said calmly. "I was friendly to all the staff. Maybe she misinterpreted professional courtesy." "Did you ever contact Rebecca outside of work?" I asked. "No," he said. I had no reason to. But when we checked his phone records and credit card statements, we found something different. Marcus had texted Rebecca multiple times, starting about 3 weeks before her death. The texts started professional, asking about account details, requesting meetings, but gradually shifted in tone. He'd asked her out for drinks. He'd complimented her appearance. He'd suggested they meet privately to discuss some confidential matters. Rebecca's responses had been increasingly brief and dismissive. She'd said she wasn't interested in socializing outside of work. She'd suggested he contact her supervisor if he needed to discuss accounts. She'd been polite but firm. But Marcus had kept pushing. The final text, sent the night Rebecca died, was chilling in its simplicity. "I'm at the Heritage Garage. Level 3, come talk to me. We need to resolve this." Rebecca had responded, "I'm not coming. Please stop contacting me." And then, nothing. No more texts. Rebecca had apparently ignored 3 subsequent messages from Marcus before she died that night. We brought Marcus back in for a second interview, this time with a lawyer present. He still denied everything, but his composure had cracked slightly. He admitted to texting Rebecca, but claimed it was all professional. He claimed he didn't go to the parking garage that night. He claimed he was home alone, no alibi. We got a warrant to search his vehicle and apartment. In his apartment, we found photographs of Rebecca. Dozens of them. Some were taken from his office, showing her at her desk. Others were taken outside her apartment building. Several were taken through windows or at angles that suggested he'd been following her, documenting her movements. There were also receipts from coffee shops near her apartment, parking tickets from her neighborhood, and a detailed map of her daily route to and from work, marked with times and observations. Marcus had been stalking Rebecca for weeks, but the most damning evidence came from his vehicle. In the trunk, we found a tire iron, the kind that could match the trauma on Rebecca's head. The tool had been hastily cleaned but still had traces of blood and tissue. We arrested him on suspicion of murder. During interrogation, Marcus's composure finally collapsed. He confessed. He said Rebecca had been leading him on with her professionalism and politeness. He said he'd been in love with her, and she'd rejected him publicly in front of other employees. He said that night, he'd waited for her in the parking garage, and when she refused to listen to him, when she tried to walk away, he'd lost control. The confession was detailed, and the evidence was overwhelming. But here's what haunted me about the case. Marcus had been stalking Rebecca for weeks. He'd been photographing her without consent. He'd been following her to her home. He'd been obsessing over her, and no one had stopped him. Not her workplace, not the police, not anyone. Rebecca had reported his inappropriate behavior to her employer, and they had essentially dismissed her concern because he was a valuable client. She'd started ignoring his texts, but she'd never called the police. Maybe she didn't think it was serious enough. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she didn't want to escalate the situation. And by the time she understood the danger, it was too late. During the trial, Jennifer testified that after Rebecca's initial complaint about Marcus, several women at the firm had come forward to say he'd been inappropriate with them too. But management had told them the same thing they told Rebecca. Don't make a big deal out of it. He's an important client. The firm ended up settling a lawsuit with Rebecca's mother for an undisclosed amount, but that settlement came too late to matter. Marcus was convicted of second-degree murder. He's serving 35 years. But the investigation expanded after his conviction. The detective assigned to follow up started looking into Marcus's history more deeply. It turned out he'd worked at 3 different firms before coming to Morrison and Associates. At 2 of those firms, women had filed complaints about his behavior. Inappropriate comments, unwanted attention, boundary violations. In both cases, he'd been fired or forced to resign, and in both cases, the firms hadn't reported his behavior to other companies. He'd moved on, got hired elsewhere, and the cycle had continued. When we looked even deeper, we found that Marcus had a history of obsessive behavior toward women. He'd been arrested in 2005 for stalking an ex-girlfriend. He'd served 18 months and been released with a restraining order, which had eventually expired. After that, there was nothing in the formal record. But informally, there were women who'd encountered him over the years, women who'd felt watched, followed, uncomfortable, women who'd reported him to their employers and been told not to make a big deal out of it. Women who'd assumed they were overreacting. What the investigation revealed was a pattern of systemic failure. Marcus had been displaying warning signs for over a decade. He'd had legal consequences for stalking. He'd been disciplined at multiple jobs for inappropriate behavior toward women. And yet, he'd continued to be hired, continued to move through professional spaces, continued to be enabled by employers who prioritized client relationships over employee safety. Rebecca Walsh died because multiple people and systems failed to take her concerns seriously, failed to report Marcus's behavior to future employers, failed to recognize patterns, failed to intervene before violence became inevitable. The prosecutor put it simply during closing arguments: Rebecca Walsh would be alive today if anyone had listened to her, if anyone had believed her, if anyone had treated her safety as more important than keeping a valued client happy. I've been a detective for 18 years, and I thought I understood how violence works. I thought I understood predators and their patterns. What I didn't fully understand until Rebecca's case was how effectively systems protect predators by protecting the comfortable status quo. Every employer is motivated to avoid lawsuits and controversy. Every business is motivated to keep valuable clients happy. Every person is motivated to assume the best about people we interact with regularly. These motivations are so strong that they override even clear warning signs. And predators, the ones who are patient, who are smart, who understand social dynamics, exploit that system relentlessly. Since Rebecca's case, I've worked with organizations across Denver to implement better protocols for reporting and responding to harassment and stalking. I've testified in cases involving workplace safety. I've tried to use my position to push for systemic change, but I know it's not enough, because somewhere right now, there's a woman being followed by someone who feels entitled to her attention. There's an employer deciding that client relationships are more important than employee safety. There's someone being told to not make a big deal out of it when they report feeling threatened. And unless that system changes, unless we collectively decide that safety is more important than comfort, there will be more Rebecca Walshes, more women whose concerns were dismissed until it was too late. If you're ever in a workplace and you feel uncomfortable around someone, report it. Don't minimize it. Don't assume you're overreacting. And if you're an employer and someone reports harassment or threatening behavior, believe them. Take it seriously. Report it forward. Don't let that person move on to harm someone else at a different company, because the price of that silence isn't abstract. It's a real woman, dead in a parking garage, whose only crime was asking someone to respect her boundaries. And that's a price that's far too high. Story 5. My name is Erica Conway, and up until last December I thought the holidays were lonely, but safe. A time to eat microwave dinners, watch reruns, and count the weeks until the sun came back. I rented an apartment by myself on the edge of Milwaukee, small but warm, the kind of place you forget as soon as you leave. I always stayed in town for work, and with my family in California and no boyfriend, the only plans I had were to treat myself to spiked hot chocolate and a few nights of aimless TikTok scrolling. This story isn't a ghost story or a monster story. It's about how winter, darkness, and the holidays can cover for people with very real, very dangerous intentions. The second week of December, a blizzard descended on Milwaukee. Roads vanished beneath a thick, glassy crust. All week, schools closed, buses stopped, even the grocery store shortened hours. The smart thing to do was stay inside, but I still had work, retail, holiday overtime, endless shifts fitting, people for ugly sweaters and packing their purchases in festive bags. When the roads got too bad to drive, I started walking home, late, 2.5 miles through mostly empty residential streets. Thursday evening, the store closed early. At 7 p.m., everything was already dark. The only sound was my boots crunching on refrozen snow. I cut across a small city park. The path was a short cut, half shoveled, lit only by the yellow of a single flickering lamp. There was a bench. Next to it was something that hadn't been there the night before, a red gift bag with tissue paper poking out. For some reason, I stopped. Maybe I was feeling hopeful. Maybe I was too tired not to. Inside was a squat white box, neatly taped. There was nothing written on it, not even a to or from. Weird flex, but some kind of local holiday event. I almost left it, but after a long day's work, any sign of cheer felt like a lifeline, so I carried it with me. A block before my building, I noticed footsteps behind me. Not right behind, distant, deliberate, stopping when I stopped, half muffled by the snow. I sped up. They sped up. I turned to look. The sidewalk was empty. I felt stupid but rushed inside, double-locked the door, turned on the lights and threw the bag on the couch. My phone pinged, a message from an unknown number. "Did you get the present?" My stomach clenched. I stared at the screen until it went dark again. The next morning the snow had stopped. The world gleamed blue and glassy. I turned the box over in my hands. No sticker, cheap tape job. Inside was a single oven mitt wrapped around a pair of wool socks and a peppermint stick. Generic Dollar Tree stuff. It sort of looked like something a neighbor would leave out, but none of my neighbors liked me. Too young, too single, too rarely home. I left it on the counter, changed, and went to work. At my lunch break, another text came through. "The mitt looks cute in your kitchen." I froze, scanning the store. But the windows were covered with fake snow and spray frost. I texted back, "Who is this?" I waited. Nothing. That night, I didn't take the shortcut through the park. I circled 3 extra blocks, sticking to busy roads with traffic and light. Still, I felt the same prickling unease, like someone was tracking, just out of sight. When I got home, the bag was gone from the couch. I bolted the door, checked every room, checked under the bed. I told myself I was overreacting, but then I found a new bag by my pillow, green this time, with tissue paper. Silly? Maybe. But now my skin itched. Inside was a Christmas card, no writing on the envelope. The card itself simply read, "You're making this fun. Good girl." I barely slept. Every sound outside the apartment took on a sinister edge, the creak of ice, the grind of the elevator, the rattle of pipes. Saturday night before Christmas, my building's fire alarm went off at midnight. The klaxon screeched, lights flashed, people shuffled out in slippers and pajamas, annoyed and complaining. I threw on boots, my jacket, and my phone. Outside, the street was deserted except for a single police cruiser parked down the block, lights off. It didn't quite look right, but no one else seemed to care. We all stood in the snow, waiting for maintenance to give the all clear. I stuck with a cluster of neighbors, Mrs. Peterlin from across the hall, and 3 college kids from upstairs safety in numbers. A minute later, a figure slid close, face hidden by a red scarf. "You forgot your present," he said, holding another bag red-green covered in snowflakes. "Back off," I said, louder than I intended. Mrs. Peterlin looked at me, confused. He backed away, vanishing behind the row of parked cars. My pulse thundered. I started to call 911, but at that moment, the all-clear sounded, the doors opened, and everyone trudged back inside. When I reached my apartment, a bag was taped to my door. Sunday, the texts kept coming. "Don't ignore me. Don't let your neighbors ruin my surprise. Don't call the cops. It's just us now." The police brushed me off. "It's probably seasonal pranksters, but call if you see him loitering." Apartments in my building had poor security and too many hidden entrances, 100 ways in. I put a chair against the doorknob and hardly slept. Monday night, power flickered during a snow squall, plunging the building into shadow. Amid the dark, heavy footfalls moved up the stairwell. I could hear someone trying each door in turn, knock, pause, jostle. Down the hall, someone's old dog barked. The steps stopped at my unit, and a hush fell. A soft thud, another bag, pressed tight against the lock. My hands shook as I called 911. Dispatch said a car would circle the block. I waited, listening. The footsteps didn't fade, they grew bolder. My peephole showed a shape, tall, bundled, hiding his face, carrying something. The figure dropped low, pressed against my door, and for a long, endless minute, waited. Then, as a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, he retreated. The bag remained. Inside, a cheap Polaroid photo of me, taking out the trash at 6:47 the morning before. On the back, "Not everyone gets to unwrap their present. Be grateful." The police took a report. They suggested I stay with someone, but I had no one. I spent Christmas Eve awake, kitchen knife in hand, every light in the apartment blazing. Christmas Day, the sun shone bright, the streets glittered, and nothing happened. The texts stopped. No new gifts, no noises. By the time night fell, I was ragged with exhaustion. I left the oven mitt, now repulsive, behind, grabbed my things, and went to a hotel. When I returned 3 days later, my landlord was desperate. Someone had tried to jimmy open my kitchen window and had slashed the screen. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, but you'll need to call the locksmith." He'd found another bag jammed in the mailbox, this time just a handful of black trash, strands of my own hair tangled around a candy cane. The number never texted me again. I moved in January. New city, new job. I carry pepper spray now, sleep with my phone on the nightstand, and never, ever walk home alone in the winter dark. People think horror comes from the unknown, the supernatural. But the truth is, it comes from whoever is able to watch your routine, map your loneliness, and slowly, methodically, wrap you in fear until you're as fragile as the snow outside. And if you ever find a gift bag in the park during December, leave it behind. Sometimes a present isn't a present. It's a warning you won't notice until it's far, far too late.